A few months ago, a friend of mine who is a nature photographer decided to spend a day and night alone in the woods outside of our town. She wanted to get photos of the woods and wildlife as naturally as she could for her portfolio. She wasn't afraid of being alone, as she had camped by herself many times before. She set up a tent in the middle of a small clearing and spent the day taking pictures. She filled up 4 rolls of film on that trip, but when she went and got them developed, she saw 4 pictures that unsettled her. These 4 pictures were taken from inside the tent, of her, asleep, in the middle of the night. I love the rain. I love how it just seems to make everything better. Smoother, even. Most people just like the idea of rain. They like the sound it makes when heard from inside, or how it can be an outward expression of the sadness they feel within. They like to look gloomily out the window and dwell upon the sad and unfair things in life. But I'm different. I don't love it because I find it relaxing. I don't enjoy sitting in the window and absently daydreaming. No, I love to be in the rain. I love to be in the kind of rain that's so heavy it makes it hard to see or hear. You see, nobody notices the woman with the chloroform rag sneaking up behind them as they're foolishly rushing to shelter, nor is anyone as likely to see the woman dragging the limp body to the dark alleyway where her car is parked. And nobody, surely, will hear the muffled screaming coming from the woods, masked by the rain. It hasn't rained in a while, but there's supposed to be one heck of a rainstorm tonight. And I can feel the first droplets already starting to fall. Should you find yourself driving during the small hours of the morning, long before the sun shows its face, you should be advised to, at all costs, avoid Route 963. It has no home, so unfortunately you can't avoid it simply by living in the right place. It just kind of pops up. It welcomes weary travelers who wouldn't call it a night and buy a room. If you see it, do not take it. Even if curiosity strikes up the thought, it's not worth it. If, for some reason, you make the wrong turn, well, you're screwed. Hope and pray you have enough gas to last you a while. You're going to need it. If you drive an electric, the same holds true for the vehicle's charge. You'll quickly begin to notice that Route 963 has no exits, nor pull-offs, nor rest stops, nor gas stations, nor anything. That is because Route 963 is different. Unlike your typical highways, Route 963 is not a means to an end, but rather an end itself. It has nowhere to take you, except to take you. If it was playing previously, your radio will likely pick up a new frequency, a channel that plays loud music in an unfamiliar language. Feel free to turn it off, though it won't do you any good. It should be noted, at this point, you'll likely begin to panic. Do not stop your vehicle. Do not turn the vehicle around. Do not look in the rearview mirror. Should you do any of these, the results may vary. If you stop and attempt to go back the way you came, you will be met with a harsh realization. There is no way back. Attempt to drive into the blackness that follows you and let the spider wrap you in its web. That's exactly what Route 963 wanted in the first place. If you look into the rear view, you'll be met with one of 2 sights. You may see nothing but blackness. Keep driving. Eventually, it will find you. Or, you may see a dim set of headlights following you. In the event that you do, keep driving. Just hope and pray you don't run out of gas, at least for a little while. I must have been 6 or 7 when I lived in Lebanon. The country was ravaged by war at the time, and murders were common and frequent. I remember during a particularly vicious era, when the bombings rarely stopped, I would stay at home, sitting in front of my television, watching a very, very strange show. It was a kid's show that lasted about 30 minutes, and contained strange and sinister images. To this day, I believe it was a thinly veiled attempt on the part of the media to use scare tactics to keep kids in place, because the moral of every episode revolved around very uptight ideologies. Stuff like, bad kids stay up late, bad kids have their hands under the covers when they sleep, and bad kids steal food from the fridge at night. It was very weird, and in Arabic to top it off. I didn't understand much of it, but for the most part, the images were very graphic and comprehensive. The thing that stuck with me the most, however, was the closing scene. It remained much the same in every episode. The camera would zoom in on an old, rusted, closed door. As it got closer to the door, strange and sometimes ominous, agonizing screams would become more audible. It was extremely frightening, especially for children's programming. Then a text would appear on the screen in Arabic reading, "That's where bad kids go." Eventually, both the image and the sound would fade out, and that would be the end of the episode. About 15 or 16 years later, I became a journalistic photographer. That show had been in my mind all of my life, popping up in my thoughts sporadically. Eventually, I'd had enough and decided to do some research. I finally managed to uncover the location of the studio where much of that channel's programming had been recorded. Upon further research, and eventually traveling on site, I found out it was now desolate and had been abandoned after the big war ended. I entered the building with my camera. It was burnt out from the inside. Either a fire had broken out or someone had wanted to incinerate all of the wooden furniture. After a few hours of cautiously making my way into the studio and snapping pictures, I found an isolated, out-of-the-way room. After having to break through a few old locks and managing to break the heavy door open, I remained frozen in the doorway for several long minutes. Traces of blood, feces, and tiny bone fragments lay scattered across the floor. It was a small room and an extremely morbid scene. What truly frightened me, though, what made me turn away and never want to come back, was the bolted, caged microphone hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the room. Some say on Halloween night, if you go past 7 black gates, you will see the 7 gates of hell. I thought it was a myth at first, until I tried it. I went past 7 black gates around my neighborhood, and then, when I went to sleep, my dreams were in a furious fire. Then it stopped. There was a man, tall and bulky. His eyes were rather squinted, which shows he's old. His legs and hands were thin and looked like he could barely support his weight. He spoke. He spoke with a scratchy and dying tone. He said, "Imiclu inter neves lesken klang." He chuckled and opened the gate. My whole body became numb. Moving on its own, I could not fight it. Struggling did not work. I gave up trying to fight it, and struggling without control, I went past the first gate. Gate 1. I saw fire, showing the corpses that were horribly mutilated, desecrated, and burnt. They were sobbing so loudly that I couldn't hear the crackles of the fire. One came to me, with one eye and bullet holes all over him. He said, "We are the desecrated corpses who did not get a proper burial. We are here to stay until Judgment Day." I went past him and to the second gate. It was in a building. Gate 2. I was in a dungeon. There were people tied up, screaming in pain. One was being sawed in half very slowly, and his body kept healing, ready to be sawed again. One was in the Iron Maiden, with the door being closed and opened, and the body looking as normal as ever. A man in an executioner's mask said to me, "We are the torturer, tortured by our own devices." I went past him to the exit. I walked to the third gate. Gate 3. This time I was in a forest. This time, it was silent except for a few yells. There was a man hanging from a noose. Another one fell off a cliff, reappeared, and fell off again. I was running away from what I saw, which was a horribly burnt woman chasing after me. I already knew what this place was. These were the people who committed suicide. I ran into the fourth gate. It was in a palace. Gate 4. I was in there. I saw emperors, politicians, and really wealthy people. An emperor was being gnawed on by lions. When the lion ripped a limb out or slashed him, the part grew back. A politician was being beaten by what looked like shadows in prisoner's clothes. A man in a suit came to me and said, "We are the corrupted people, the people who used our power to help ourselves, not the people." I walked to the next gate, the 5th. Gate 5. I was in another room. There was a man tied up on a bed being lashed by floating spiky leather whips. A woman was being burnt by a lighter, but her screams and cries were muffled by a cloth that was used as a gag. A rather large man came up to me and said, "We are the rapists and sex offenders paying for our crimes on Earth." I ran to the 6th gate. Gate 6. I was in a room again. I saw a man and a woman being stabbed, their wounds healing almost immediately. Another person was being buried alive, and another being hit and jabbed with a floating metal bar. I knew who these were. These were the people who are murderers being harmed the same way they killed their victims. The exit was the 7th gate. The final one. This nightmare is almost over. It's almost over, I said to myself. Gate 7. I was outside. There was a man wearing a shroud over his head, coated with explosives. He blew up, regenerated, and blew up again. Another one was being beaten, stabbed by sharp metal objects, and burned by torches, lighters, and matches. They were held by people who looked like shadows. One of them came to me and said, "They are the mass murderers, the terrorists, and suicide bombers. I am a shadow of one of his victims, beating him and taking revenge for killing us on Earth." I ran to the exit. When I woke up in the morning, I became horribly scared. The images of what I saw ran through my head. In fact, that was all I was thinking of for the whole year. It became Halloween again. I didn't dare go outside at night. I just went to bed. It took me a while to sleep. When I did, I was in front of the first gate of hell. There was a teenager like me. He was staring at me. He was shocked to see me. My body then became numb. I could not control myself again. I said to him in a scratchy, dying tone, "Enclum unter nebs, sega loska." I chuckled and opened the gate for him. After he went inside, with an expression that looked like he was fighting something and struggling, I looked at myself on a goblet filled with what looked like blood. I saw the gatekeeper. I became the gatekeeper. In fact, I am the gatekeeper. I had forgotten how much I missed snow. As soon as I was old enough, I escaped the brutal winters of my childhood home in New England to start my young family in southern Georgia. Now, as a grown man with 2 sons, I felt like a kid again, praying all week that the weatherman would be accurate for once, and that this unusually cold weather would bless our subtropical suburb with some snow for the first time in 60 years. The ominous, icy winds racing through our neighborhood and the skeletal shelves of the supermarket made the prospect of this freak event seem very likely. The morning after the big snowstorm was supposed to hit, I was like a kid on Christmas. As soon as I awoke, I ran to the window to see if the predictions rang true, and boy did they. Overnight, the heavens had opened and dumped a massive half-inch of fresh powder on our southern paradise. The city's infrastructure was not prepared for this once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon, and my wife and I were excused from work and the kids from school. I decided to take my boys outside and teach them the wintertime activities I had learned as a child. The kids and I ventured out into the frozen landscape, and I paused to appreciate a perspective of my neighborhood I never thought I would be able to see. As I watched my boys try to form snowballs out of the measly dust, my eyes drifted to an imperfect patch of snow by my house. Walking over to investigate, I discovered the disturbance was a trail of footprints that led to and from my house and the forest at the edge of my yard. Confused by the unfamiliar tracks, I looked up and my stomach dropped when I realized where they stopped. The nondescript boot prints halted just a few feet away from my youngest son's bedroom window. We live in a safe neighborhood, so we never lock his window or close his curtains. I realized that the tracks must have belonged to a stranger who had been mere feet away from my unprotected son. I started to feel sick when I realized, because this was the first time his prints were visible, and there's no way of knowing how long this monster had been watching my son sleep. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting in class and doing math. It was 6 more minutes until after school. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. His desk was next to the window, and he turned and looked to the grass outside. It looked like a picture. When school was over, he ran to the spot where he saw it. He ran so fast that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It had a picture of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful, he wanted to meet her. So he ran all over school and asked everyone if they knew her or if they've seen her before, but everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he went home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately, she said no. It was very late, so Tom walked up the stairs, placed the picture on his bedside table, and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap on his window. It was like a nail tapping. He got scared. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow near his window. So he got out of his bed, walked towards the window, opened it up, and followed the giggling. By the time he reached it, it was gone. The next day, he asked his neighbors if they knew her. Everybody said, sorry, no. When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew the girl. She said no. He went to his room, placed the picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again, he was awakened by a tapping. He took the picture and followed the giggling. He walked across the road when suddenly he got hit by a car. He was dead with the picture in his hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help him, but it was too late. Suddenly, he saw the picture and picked it up. He saw a cute girl holding up 3 fingers. God forbid you should ever find yourself in one of those so-called funeral homes. Granted, the likeliness of such an event is rather high, especially depending on the ages of your parents and their parents and, if applicable, their parents. There's an entire industry centered around death, so prior to your own mortality, you'll likely step foot in one of those rotten places. Now, let me digress. Not all funeral homes are bad. In fact, your average run-of-the-mill mom-and-pop funeral home is likely just another cog in the middle-class economic machine. You'd be doing a public disservice to not spend your hard-earned dollar letting mom-and-pop pump dear old grandma with formaldehyde. However, with that said, not all funeral homes are good. And largely, I reason this is because of the dry mouths. Not many people know about dry mouths. I realize this probably includes you, too. That's okay. It's probably for the better, considering public knowledge would probably lead to mass hysteria. Imagine taking the bus home and wondering if the little girl in the green dress across from you was actually hit by a truck 3 weeks prior. Pretty morbid, I know. But this is the harsh reality of the dry mouths. No one is exactly sure as to when this started, but for whatever reason, certain funeral homes would lose cadavers out of nowhere. Clumsy shop owners, maybe, but how on earth could you lose a 260-pound man in the middle of the night? Some people theorize the bodies were probably stolen, though I beg for one good reason to steal a naked corpse from a funeral home, besides the select few sickos that sleep with the thing. I'd rather not talk about it. Maybe the bodies were unaccounted for or cremated accidentally. This isn't true either. I used to work at a funeral home, and we take the very serious precautions to account for each and every body that comes through the place. To me, there's only one answer: dry mouths. When you embalm a corpse, a process I'll not dive into to avoid your loss of appetite, upon the removal of the major organs and blood, you pump the body full of chemicals and stuff the major orifices with cotton. It's a grueling process. To lend insight, consider stuffing 7 wads of cotton into a 300-pounder's rectum. Charming, I know. The point of this is to explain why they're called dry mouths. They get the nickname from the balled-up wads of cotton stuffed into their noses, throats, and other areas after awaking. And yes, you read that right. Awaking. The day I quit, I was just building up the nerve to ask for a raise from the boss man. I had worked at that funeral parlor for around ballpark 4 years, and I felt as if my grueling day-to-day tasks deserved some more adequate financial compensation. As I walked from my embalming room to the head office, I ran into the boss's wife in the hallway. She turned around and smiled at me. I would have smiled back, but the knowledge that I had just removed her heart and pancreas the day before didn't put me in a jolly mood. In fact, my reaction was a loud gasp, followed by my body tumbling to the ground as my hands grasped at the carpet, pulling me away from the woman who clearly was suffering from a bad case of rigor mortis. As my hands tugged along the carpet, they happened to grip a nasty wad of phlegm-covered cotton. I suppose awakening from a cancer-induced nap and finding wads of cotton lining your esophagus wouldn't be too pleasant. The woman stretched out her pale, frail hands towards me and opened her dry mouth. She looked as if she was trying to scream, but considering the absence of lungs, that'd be the last thing to come out. As my back finally pressed against the glass door, pouring sunlight onto my shoulders, I saw my boss step out from his office. He shot a glance at me, and then to his late wife. He let out a whimper, filled both with great joy and sorrow. I watched as he ran to embrace his wife. As she turned to face him, I pushed through the glass door and ran to my car. I considered that my resignation. Astonishing as it may seem, my story is not the only one. In fact, this kind of thing happens quite often. And, as I've mentioned, there are some bright theories as to why, but only that, theories. Some people think that the chemicals arranged in embalming fluid creates a charge that stimulates the muscles. Now that's a cute idea, but the carcass of a week-old woman chasing me down a hallway seems a bit more than a stimulated muscle. Other people, particularly my mortuary friends, believe the deceased were never so, but rather prematurely pronounced dead by a physician. Again, considering my boss's late wife was rendezvousing with me without a heart and lungs, throws that idea out the window too. Others have a different, less medically sound opinion. Some people believe that dry mouths are a sign of the end times. Maybe they're demons with skin, otherworldly beings parading as us. Maybe reincarnation is right, but we didn't read the fine print. Or maybe Revelation was right, and the dead really do rise. Essentially, we are at a loss, and God forbid you should go into a funeral home, or a morgue, or a hospital, or your home. Because, lo and behold, a month after my quote-unquote resignation, I received a Christmas card from my boss. And yes, she was on the card too. Dry mouths aren't trying to hide. They're hidden in plain sight. They're all around us, without cause and without reason. The dead walk among the living, and the living are too numb to realize it. They are intruders, wrapped in a flesh suit. I only have one question for the dry mouths. Why? Why are you here? What do you want? Do you wish to feast on our numb brains with your dry mouths? Are you here for my soul? Do you want anything from us? I suppose a dry mouth has the same purpose in life that I do. The only difference being that I have a life. Or maybe that's the biggest lie of all. Maybe we're all dry mouths. We've only forgotten that we've already spat out the cotton. It was approximately 12:15 when I entered the Johnson County Community Health Clinic. I was there for an appointment and had set it up weeks ago. Just a routine checkup. It wasn't a new place for me. I'd been there a couple times before. However, the place had an odd nostalgic feeling to it, as if it were a location from my childhood or something. And I could never pinpoint exactly what this feeling was or where it came from. As I walked in, an overwhelming feeling of deja vu swept over me. The hum of the flickering fluorescent lights, the white tile flooring, the muted beige paint that colored the walls. I noticed that there was a TV mounted in the corner, a smaller flat screen, that was playing a short PowerPoint slideshow on loop of ads and events that were being held by the clinic. I passed the empty waiting area, a small area of the main room with magazines, children's playthings, and blue cushioned chairs, and approached the woman at the front desk. She was sitting in her bluish-gray office chair, looking at a spreadsheet on the same Windows XP desktop that they've had since 2008. There was a sign-in sheet on the counter in front of me. "I have an appointment with Dr. Pepsins," I asked. "What time?" 12:30, I replied. She began typing something into her keyboard. "Ah, yes," she responded. "Gary Johnson?" "Mm-hmm." "Yes, I'll tell the doctor. Please fill this out." She handed me a clipboard, which held a simple fill-out form. I walked back to the waiting area, took a seat, and began to fill out the form. I was about halfway done with filling out my information when I slumped back in my chair. I hadn't gotten much sleep in the night prior, and I was exhausted. As I slumped back, I noticed something very peculiar. My head never hit the wall. In fact, it felt like it went in. I got up, quite frightened, and looked at the wall. Nothing. Not a single hole or dent had been made in the wall by my head. So I reached to touch the wall, and my fingers went through it. I recoiled in shock. What was that? I thought, as I reached to touch the wall again, only to find my fingers clipped through once more. Then suddenly I lost my balance, tripped, and fell directly through the wall. I fell face first onto some dirty tan carpeting. Upon getting back up, I realized that I was in a completely different room. Well, not a room per se, more so a set of rooms, all of which connected by openings. The walls were covered in gross tan pattern wallpaper. There was also an overwhelming stench of moist carpet. I turned back around and tried to put my hand back through the wall. It wouldn't go through. "Okay, what?" I muttered. I looked back into the room. There were no windows, no doors, nothing on the walls. Other than that disgusting wallpaper, of course. It was completely empty aside from a singular plastic blue school chair. At this point, the only thing running through my mind was fear and the repeating thought of "I need to leave" on loop in my head. I started running through the rooms, desperately trying to find an exit, but to no avail. There was no exit. Was this my permanent location until I died? No. There has got to be a way out. I wasn't just going to be left here, right? Eventually, someone would notice that I was gone. But nobody did. Then, in the distance, I heard footsteps. But not those of humans, at least not a normal human. Alongside the footsteps was a gurgling snarl, like that of an angry animal. I began to run. I ran as fast as I could from whatever was approaching me. I didn't want anything to do with it. I ran for what seemed like forever, but was always back in the same room I started in. At least, it looked like the same room, not that I could tell them apart. So I sat down, defeated. A feeling of dread filled my body as I started to cry. I was going to die here. I'm still there. I haven't left. I've accepted my fate. In fact, I can actually hear footsteps. I wonder who that is.